Welcome back to the final episode of this season's RAG podcast with me, Sean Anderson, the CEO and founder of Hoxo Media. This is the show where every single week I bring to you stories from some of the most successful and innovative recruitment owners on the planet. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Jamie Woods. Jamie is the CEO and founder of JCW Group, a multi-brand recruitment organization and a venture capital private equity business, all combined into one, focusing on everything that it relates to talent. With 140 people across offices in London, Frankfurt, Austin, New York, LA, and soon to be Boston, with work also going on in different regions such as Amsterdam and Switzerland. 14 years old. There's got to be so many stories in here. So Jamie and I were supposed to record, or we had it pretty much penciled in to record in March, April 2020. And we all know what happened then. So, Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, mate. Good to speak to you again. Yeah, I actually remember chatting to you. I think the first time we spoke, we obviously didn't do the recording, but we spoke. It must have been like 3-4 days after lockdown.
Yeah.
So right when, it was panic stations. I remember.
Well, we were messaging, and it was through your marketing guy, wasn't it, Dan? And
yeah, that's right.
When I was messaging you, you're like, yep. And then I literally phoned you up. I was like, look, do you want to do it? And you were like, look, I'll be honest, a bit preoccupied right now, but I'll definitely do it. So we eventually got it booked in. So
here we are.
Yeah, here we are. Jamie, look, I've given a really, really, high level overview there. For the listeners, could you just tell us a bit more about who you are and that overarching, what is JCW Group?
Yeah. Okay. So Jamie Woods, CEO and founder of JCW Group. I think I'm probably best describe the business. It's made up of two constituent parts. So on one side, we have what we call our core recruitment business. That's made up of 3 different brands: technology, financial services, life sciences, permanent and contract, contingent and retained, spread across 5 different offices, 2 in Europe, 3 in the US. Mm-hmm. And then the sort of second element of the business, which is a sort of slightly more grandiose side of things, at least how it sounds from a sort of when we start talking about private equity and stuff, but it is probably best described as a venture capital / incubator / accelerator type play, where we'll talk about it more later, no doubt, but we incubate organizations, always, at least so far, talent focused organizations, and then look to sort of grow them within the umbrella, and in that side of the business, we've currently got 3 in the portfolio. So we've got a management consulting and staff augmentation business out in the US. We have an academy business here in the UK, one of those recruit, train, deploy businesses. And we have a sort of a platform enabled recruitment company out in Austin. You whack those all together under the group. We've got, as you say, about sort of 140 people. Group revenues, something in the region of 50 million sterling, with about 20 million net fee income underneath that, and profits in the region of sort of net profit 5 to 6 million underneath that. And then I sit at the top as a CEO, kind of responsible for making sure everyone knows where they're going and, making sure we get there, of course. And I've kind of been doing that role to one extent or another for the last, 14 odd years. As you said, kind of lived through 2 fairly brutal recessions, including like the one we're technically still in. Made some good decisions. I think I made a lot more bad decisions, or a few bad decisions at least.
We all do.
That's it, really.
Well, look, look, there's so much to talk about. It's incredible, really. And one thing you said to me before the show was you are in the very room today you started the business.
Yeah. So this is the first flat that I ever bought back when I was sort of in my second year of recruitment, and then after I left my first company, Eames, which I'm sure we'll talk about, I set the business up in this very living room. Yeah, wow. Sitting right there.
Did you have any grand plans back then? Did you see the business you have today, or what did you see? Do you think at the very beginning as a future?
Yeah, I had nothing but grand plans, to be honest. It was always going to be a growth organization. I was always looking to sort of try and build something as good and as big as I possibly could do. And whilst I'm very content with where we are now, I think, to be honest, if I kind of went back in time and had a chat to my 24-year-old self sitting at the table there, I'd probably be a little bit disappointed with how far I've come. But it's classic. Like when you're like highly inexperienced, but also very arrogant, sort of full of beans, 24-year-old recruitment consultant, you just have no appreciation of how difficult it's going to be. You see other people making mistakes. You think that's never going to be you. And long story short, like the journey has been pretty, there've been lots of ups and downs. It's just a lot harder than you appreciate it. But yeah, from day one, the plan was always to build something serious here, scale it up.
So I think you'd be disappointed with 140 people, 50 million revenue and 5-6 million net profit. I mean, wow, that's some big expectation. Big expectation.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably more the way my mindset works more than anything. But it's, like I said, like we've made mistakes along the way that have set us back. And like if you didn't make those mistakes, the business would have been, we're doing okay now, but we could have done even better if we'd have done things slightly different, which is generally my mindset anyway, which works well for me to make sure I'm continuously improving and developing. Don't get me wrong, I'm content with where we are. I'm not saying I'm disappointed, but I think my 24-year-old self, if I asked him, right, where are you going to be when you're 38, it would have been some ridiculous answer about 2,000 fee earners or something crazy like that.
Well, I got into recruitment at 24. I was just turning 25, and even when I started Hoxo, I don't think I was as big a thinker as you, if I'm honest. I think the thing about Hoxo which excited me was I could see the scale in it. I could see the amount, the sheer volume of recruitment agencies that would probably, that didn't know enough about marketing. I could feel shit. They're I mean, and it was only based on my own knowledge of Eames was a big competitor of mine. And I knew the London market well. I'd worked in Australia. I knew there was I didn't know quite how big the recruitment industry was, but I was excited by scale, but I don't think I ever put a number on it or anything at that point. It just didn't feel like I just didn't see that way. So take us back to 23-year-old Jamie or whatever that got into recruitment. What? Yeah. So you were only in your second year when you set your business up. Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah. Which looking back is just,
it's nuts, isn't it?
Bonkers, really. Yeah. I don't know why or how, but anyway, so I, like everyone does, sort of stumbled across recruitment. I think so. Eames was the company I ended up joining. I must have interviewed with pretty much every other recruitment company in London and been firmly rejected from pretty much all of them. By that point, I actually remember, I was thinking about this the other day. There was one rec to rec who I went to meet. I remember meeting him, and he had a sort of fairly fancy office in Islington, and he actually told me to not waste my time or anyone else's time trying to go into recruitment because it was never going to work out for me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just thinking back.
Do you want to name Jamie or not?
I can't remember his name. I can't remember the company. I actually looked into my old Hotmail account the other day to think, I wonder if I've got an appointment there for him so I can, don't know what that information.
I had a very similar story in Australia because I've told this before. I went to a rec to rec and I was a teacher from bloody proper working class background. I didn't know anything about business. And he asked me, what do you want to do? White collar or blue collar? And I didn't know what the fuck it meant, right? I literally didn't know. So I was like, and I knew blue chip companies were big. So I assumed blue collar was blue chip, right? So I was like, yeah, blue collar, cool. I want to work with the best or something. And he's like, idiot. And he literally went, he told me Randstad had taken no overseas candidates now. And that was the company I wanted to join purely because my mate had just got a job through Randstad, which is ridiculous. But when you're that age, that's what you think. Yeah. So I then applied to Randstad Direct. He didn't even send me in. And I got a job. And then, honestly, in my first week, he didn't even put two and two together that I was the same person. And he tried to headhunt me out. I was like, nice. I forwarded his own email back to him with my own signature saying, Randstad are taking no overseas candidates from Sean Anderson at Randstad. And then, he never replied back. But similar story. So what do you think was the difference with Eames then? I mean, I know Eames. I've interviewed Matthew and I've worked with Eames before. I know I'm a big fan of the business. What What was it like? Why did they take a punt on you?
Why did they tell me? They must have just been really desperate, to be honest. No, I think like, you know, once you've had enough interviews, you become perfect at interviewing. Yeah, you know, it's, at least for recruitment. And it's like when we get candidates sent to us by rec to recs, you know, they're so well prepped, for example, by that point, they can't really put a foot wrong, and you've got to try and work out what they actually really mean, what they actually really believe in. So I think I just learned to blag what I needed to blag. And I started off just very, very naive. But yeah, so Matt gave me my so Matt Eames, the owner of Eames, gave me my big shot. And I went in, so started off resourcer, filling IT roles for the London insurance market, getting paid £50 a placement. And yeah, I absolutely loved it, because by that point I was desperate to work. I was full of ambitions as far as what I wanted to do in life. And I kind of, from day one, I made a conscious effort to try and always be the hardest worker in the room. Yeah. And always try and be the most productive. So not just working long hours, but making sure I'm top of basically every leaderboard going, which when you're brand new, the only leaderboard you can really do well at is things like calls and stuff like that. Yeah. And yeah, I loved it. I must have been like the 6th or 7th person to join. So it was a tiny little office in Hammersmith.
Oh wow, the Hammersmith office. Yeah, that is.
Yeah, old school. Yeah, I was very excited about, you know, Matt's aspiration. So anyway, I cracked on with that, did really well, got promoted after pretty much as quick as I could do. And they had a structure back then that once you've done your first 10 deals, you get given your desk. I was destined for some, I can't remember, I think it was change into banking or change into a different type of insurance or something like that. But then around the same time I got promoted, Matt had a mate of his from back in his PSD days that was really making waves in the he had a risk management recruitment business that was doing really well, and that was basically the extent of our market research. And Matt basically said, well, that looks like it's a pretty good market, do you want to do that? And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, cool, you know, I'll be head of a division, and you know, what can go wrong? So I bit his arm off, and then fairly shortly I realized actually I've bitten off a lot here, because we had no candidates and it was a highly candidate driven market. We had no clients, because the vast majority of our clients at the time were insurance companies, which wasn't a big market for risk. I didn't really have a clue about anything. I had 6 months resourcing experience under my belt. I knew nothing about 360. And it was still a really small business at that point. And I was sitting next to Matt. I learned a hell of a lot from Matt, who, like, to this day is probably the best recruiter that I've had the pleasure of working with. And he would coach me. I'd learn a lot from just listening to him and seeing how he interacted with people. But he was growing a business around him. He was still billing like £1 million+ quid out of his clients. He's a busy guy. There's only so much he can give me. So it ended up being a real slog. And so that first, I was sort of slogging away for about 6 to 9 months without really anything happening. I do remember thinking, this is crap, actually. Like, this is not what I had in mind for myself. You know, I've been sold like the whole, hey, you know, 30 to 40K year one recruitment. And I was looking like, actually, it would probably be about 20K, 21K, something like that. I remember being tired all the time. I had no social life because I was working so hard. And I was just waking up thinking, I'm not really very good at what I do, which is, you know, it is difficult to keep going in that context. And I effectively made the decision that, right, I need to leave and go and do something else completely, like go and be a fighter pilot or something like that. And but I was so proud. I was like, there's no way I'm doing that. There's no way I'm leaving until I'm good at this. So I'm going to get good at it, and then I'm gonzo straight away. And so I was just sort of hitting my head against a brick wall, 6 to 9 months, something like that. And then one day, it was almost like a religious conversion. Like, one day I'm slogging away, scraping the barrel for 1 or 2 deals a quarter, and the next day things are just making sense for me, and I'm doing sort of 2 or 3 deals a month, like clockwork. You know, it's weird, isn't it? And you have to work so hard when you're like now in my job, where we've got all these trainees. Just keep the faith, it will happen one day, but you won't realize it until one day it just happens. But anyway, so from that point, the business around me, the wider business of Eames, was growing absolutely great guns. So it was growing, everyone was doing well, you know, really good culture. I started growing a team. My initial experience of management was a lot sort of easier and more straightforward than my initial experience of billing. So that kind of went really well, kind of from day one. And then before you know it, it's sort of late 2006. By that point, I've been with the business 2 years, 2 months. And I had 7 people underneath me. Team was doing well. Personal billings were going well. I think the wider business was about 30 people, low 30s. I'd worked my way up to being the most sort of senior person there, bar Matt. But yeah, made the decision to go for a variety of reasons and left in January 2007.
Did you know at that point you were going to start your own business?
Yeah, because the way that came about, because I didn't. So I think I can probably break my experience in Eames Consulting down to sort of two sections. So you've got the first section, which is the vast majority of time there, like probably my 18 months or something. Absolutely loved it. You know, culture spot on, everyone's successful, real nice sort of family feel to the business. Everything's going great guns. And I think if you'd have spoken to me then, I'd have said, I'm never leaving Eames. You know, my long-term plan is to grow within the business. And one day, hopefully, you know, I can do the job that Matt's doing for him. And then the second stage of the business, which is really just like the back end of the time I was there, about 6 months or so. By that time, we're getting to like late 20s, early 30s in terms of headcount, which is kind of well into that zone where things really start to get challenging. You know, a lot of recruitment companies, at least a lot of them, struggle to get through that. And it was the same for us at Eames. And we started, I think what first got me thinking about, actually, maybe I'm not going to be here for the rest of my life, is we made a couple of bad decisions. And like I had influence on decisions as part of the management team, but I didn't have control of them. And I think one of the decisions was around the commission scheme, and I can't even remember what the other decisions were. It's you know, it's all quite sort of trivial stuff from my current perspective, but you know, there were decisions that I didn't think were necessarily going to be the right decisions. They didn't necessarily then play out well to the business. It made it slightly harder for me to manage my team, keep them retained, keep them motivated. And I think it all worked out fine. Like the decisions got unwound, but I think it was the first taste of me starting to realize that actually I'm not completely in control of my own destiny. Yeah. And that actually all these ambitions and things that I want to achieve in my life, maybe I need to be master of my own destiny a bit more, you know, and the context being I'm 23. I think I've got the answers, you know.
Did you have anyone outside of work, like a father, parent, friend, mentor, anyone that was entrepreneurial, successful, that you think you picked some of this kind of drive off?
No. I mean, my parents, you know, I've had a great childhood. Parents always very supportive. I grew up in Devon. They always say, right, you got to go to London. That's where you're going to make your money. But no specific like role model or as far as what I'm going to emulate.
Well, that's, I think to have that at 23 without that is incredible. I don't think I had that at 23. Well, I definitely didn't. But I do have a similar experience of in my old agency, feeling like it was, I don't know, there's a point where the train tracks for you and them are in the right direction, same direction. Everything's moving in one, and for some reason, and it doesn't always have to be a reason that's like concrete. They just start to derail a bit, and you start to go. The business is going one way, and you're going another way in your mind. Yeah, it's hard to bring that back, and you know you might bring it back, but it sounds quite similar to me. So you quit. JCW is your initials, I imagine.
They are, yeah.
That's simple as that. Did you take any time over the name?
As it was. Yeah, not really, to be honest, mate.
No. Take us back to the room then. What did you decide to focus on at the beginning? How did you crack on? Because you'd done a few things, you'd managed some people, you know, you'd worked in risk, or did you just literally lift and shift what you were doing before? Or?
Pretty much. I think I had it wasn't just a case of right, there was a couple of bad decisions at Eames or decisions at Eames that I didn't agree with, and then I left. And ironically, by the way, I ended up making pretty much the same mistakes with JCW along the years anyway, which kind of business is just hard. And then there are other factors as well. Like I think, so I personally find generally, and definitely found during my time at Eames, that when things are going well, it's great fun, but you don't necessarily learn that much because sometimes it's not particularly clear as to why things are going well. Whereas when things are going less well, like for example, my last 6 months at Eames, when the wider business started to really get into those choppy waters of 20, 30 fee earners and beyond, it's almost as if when things are struggling, it kind of reveals the machinery underneath everything, and you can work out, okay, well, what's going wrong here? It's that bit here. Let's fix that bit here. But not only let's fix it now, but let's make sure we prioritize that bit going forward. And you just learn more, in my experience, when it comes to at least when it comes to recruitment business, for when things go wrong than when things go well. And I think off the back of that short period of time at Eames, I had a very specific vision of how I was going to build a recruitment company that was going to scale, and it was going to scale in like a fairly sort of hiccup-free fashion, which obviously didn't work out like that. The core principles I put in place are most of them are still pretty robust, and I've still got them. I still dust them off occasionally, but I had a really specific view. So I knew exactly what I was going to.
Can you remember what that was?
It's fairly basic stuff. It was building a business around that actually put people first and foremost. And I saw my job as sort of founder and director, MD, whatever, as okay, my first and foremost job is make sure that people here are happy, fulfilled, and basically don't want to go anywhere. And there's all sorts of different angles as to how you do that. Obviously, probably the most important one is making sure they're successful in the first place, because a successful recruiter is typically a happy one, even if everything else isn't particularly great. But prioritize them in the knowledge that if you prioritize effectively the culture, and had a culture which was people focused, retention focused first and foremost, then they would look after everything else. They would look after the clients, the candidates, the offering, the operations. That would all go fine. Your just job as founder, first of all, is to make sure you've got a great environment where people want to be there and don't want to go anywhere. Which again it's not exactly rocket science, but at the time it felt right. I'm kind of behind this, prioritizing it to that level. I guess another element was I wanted to try and build a business that, if I'd have hired myself, then I would have never have left like I left Eames. I thought, right, if you really want to scale up, you've got to try and build like a business that's going to be able to retain those entrepreneurial type characters who are going to sort of really accelerate your business forward. And I think, which is quite tricky to do. And it's semi-commonplace these days to talk about how you go about potentially enabling your staff to become wealthy over time. Back then, it was actually a lot rarer. I think you had S3 had their multi-brand model, and they'd made a lot of people into multi-millionaires. They're quite famous for doing that, but it wasn't so common otherwise. And I thought, right, I need to build a business here that when someone like me comes along and after a few years says, yeah, 6 figures is cool, how do I get to 7 figures? You need to have an answer for them. And the answer can be, actually, it's going to be really difficult, but this is how you do it. And to effectively create a proposition where those people find they're given a better deal to stay with the group and grow within it than if they'd gone off to one side and set up their own business.
That is literally, I'd see that so often, so often. It's a massive one that like, the bigger you get in your business, especially when you go from top biller to management and leadership, often your salary can be like the take home goes down, right? I went from 200 to 100, I think, in terms of take home, and after being promoted, and I just couldn't get my fucking head around it. I was like, how do I get to 500 grand a year, not go down? And it was a really difficult conversation. And I looking back now, I understand it, that they were like, they're trying to build a business around me. They're trying to scale me, and they're trying to, but if they'd have said, well, you get to 500 grand by doing this, I'd have been probably quite excited. But instead it was, this is a better job. And it just didn't work for me, But but I completely empathize with that. So you've got this grand plan, you've got ideas. How did it actually go? Let's go back to the start, in terms of what was the first year like working on your own? And
not good. Not good to be honest. So I was working in my working here in my living room for the first 9 months or so. These days working from home is nothing novel. Everyone's doing it post-COVID. Back then it was it just wasn't really even a concept. And to be honest, I kind of struggled with it because I built this reputation for myself, at least in my own head, of being this super diligent, hard worker, highly productive individual. And then I was getting to the point where I was getting to the end of the days working here. And, sometimes I couldn't look myself in the mirror as far as I just haven't really, I put in an okay shift by normal standards, but I've really not pulled out all the stops. And I think it was partly the distractions of being at home. I think more it was the challenge of actually having no one to be accountable to other than yourself. You can do nothing for weeks on end and no one's there to tell you not to do that. It was a real struggle. This was 2007. This was about the time that Facebook was just coming along. Facebook used to be cool back then. And I remember just losing hours to just scrolling nonsense, just complete and utter waste of time. I had these big plans, right? I'm going to set the business up, and then within 3 months, I'm going to be doing 40K a month. And I think I ended up doing something like 40K in the first 9 months. It was just exceptionally more challenging than I expected it to be. But I did slowly start building momentum. I sorted out the productivity issue by basically moving into an office. I found a shared office in Knightsbridge opposite Harrods. There was a small business that was only 3 of them, but for some reason they had a 20-person office and they were renting out the desks. And I went in there, and then after a few weeks, there was like 18 other people there, all doing weird and wonderful jobs. There was like a trader there, a marketer, and generally sort of solo businesses. And that all of a sudden I had that accountability, because I just felt like I couldn't sit there in front of these guys without basically showing them how productive I am and how hard I work. I probably wasn't particularly popular because I was the only person in that entire business that did a phone-based job. But that ended up being quite transformational. I found it really inspirational because I was opposite Harrods, and on my lunchtime I'd walk in Harrods, see all these massively expensive things, see all the fancy cars outside, and be like, okay, this is one of the reasons why you're doing this. And that was where, again, it kind of just clicked. And we get to the point where we're doing 2-3 deals a month and started hiring. So I was only actually in that Knightsbridge office for a couple of months. Left there, set up shop in Clerkenwell, hired someone, and I got really lucky with my first. If I look at something like the first 10 hires that I made, I think something like 5 or 6 of them have ended up going on to doing big roles in the business. They're not all still here, like a good few of them are, but I got really lucky as far as the capability and to an extent loyalty of those people. And it was the same with the first person I hired, who went on to do big things in the business, and he made an immediate impact. And 2008, we were rocking and rolling, making lots of money.
How big were you then?
We only 4 people, so still pretty small, but it was very exciting, good fun.
Great fun at that point, though.
It's small, yeah. So easy looking back, but yeah, really good fun. And it was what was bubbling away in the background. Like I'd managed to, like when I set up in April, I'd managed to sort of time it perfectly with the first mention of the phrase credit crunch starting to knock around. Yeah. So bubbling away in the background, you actually have got a declining market, and you've got a lot of these big recruitment companies, issuing profit warnings and blah blah blah. But we were absolutely crushing it, and I remember like I was cringy thinking back about it. But I remember we had this conversation in the office, the 4 of us, about how we were too good for the credit crunch and that kind of nonsense. Anyway, fast forward to I can't always forget if it's September or October 2008. I remember being on the bus and got a text from my dad saying Lehman Brothers has just declared bankruptcy. Again, I'm 24, 25 at that point. I don't really know what that means. I know all about Lehman Brothers because I know my market well. I know what bankruptcy is, but it doesn't connect with me how big a deal it is when a bank goes bust of that size or even any size. But I go into the office. I didn't do much work that day. I spent it glued to the news. And I distinctly remember getting the train home to my girlfriend in Essex that night in a state of panic, basically, because up until that point, I think 90% of our revenue was just from two businesses. Like, we're a very account-driven organization. I wasn't doing any external sales. All the sales I was doing was to get in those accounts bigger and bigger. And these are big, large firms that are clearly not going to be hiring as we kind of fall off the cliff. Yeah. And in those early days, people are talking about it's the end of capitalism and all this other nonsense. So it was quite scary. And I remember writing out a business plan on that train, as in, right, how I'm going to transform us overnight into a, not just sort of 3 people delivering onto my roles, but 4 people who are a sort of an effective sales force. And yeah, that didn't really work out. So everyone was like BAU, and then 2 weeks later, all hiring shut up shop. And this is another, I think there's various sort of pivotal points in the business where you think if it had gone a different way, then the business could have ended up looking very different. But I think when Lehman went bust, I think we had something like almost 200 grand's worth of starters with one client that hadn't started yet. That was starting in sort of 3 or 4 weeks later. And you're just waiting for the call. And I know plenty of other companies did this. You're waiting for the call where they say, hey, yeah, those people, we're not going to honor those starts. They need to go and find another job, or, beg their old company to take them back. Call eventually did come, and it's like, yeah, we are going to honor those starts, and, fair play to them. But that then meant, I didn't realize this at the time, but that meant once that came through, we were probably cash-wise, we were probably the strongest recruitment company in the city. Because like looking back, now that I actually understand how it all works, I know that we had something like 2 years of cash without having to make a single bit of cost cutting, and I could still pay my mortgage and all the rest of it. But so that was a big deal. But basically the market shut down, and it shut down completely for 9 months. And I remember we pulled a role. There was one role in the market at one point. It was a risk analyst role, 35K for an insurance company in Guildford. We managed to get it. There's 12 other agencies on the call. We don't fill it. It was really grim. And we had one person left. He left to be a submariner. The other 2 stuck it out. I don't know why. You must have just had faith in what we were doing. I kept billing for most of this period, so I could keep our head above water from a P&L perspective, which probably was helpful in giving people a bit of hope that actually this is going to go somewhere. And then come July time, one of those clients called us up and said, hey, great news. We've done all the redundancies we need to do. We now basically need to hire loads of new people. We've got 60 odd roles, and we just want to use you and one other firm for it on a sort of semi-exclusive basis. Are you interested? Yeah. So we took that. And from that point onwards, it was basically a rocket ship. From 2009 ended up being a really good year, even though it was basically really only half a year where the market was doing anything. And then we grew pretty much consistently from that point onwards until 2012, when we hit our own 30 plus fee earner sort of rocky patch.
I'm interrupting today's episode to introduce our sponsor, District 4. District 4 is a brand new community of expert recruiters, founded recently by James Johnson, the former CEO of Nickel Curtin Group. He sold the business last year and has set up a business that effectively allows expert top billing recruiters to own their own destiny. So post-COVID-19, there's a hell of a lot of top performers out there that are thinking, what does life look like after this? Do I really want to go back to the office? Do I really want to be surrounded by juniors? Do I want to build teams? What do I want? Well, I've been there. I was the top biller in 2015, 2016, and going into management was a decision I made, and it wasn't lightly. Having had an opportunity that would have been different, I might have gone a different way. And James is offering that opportunity, right? He's saying, if you want to earn more money, have less of the bureaucracy, if you like, of an agency, but also be surrounded by other top billers. Because I think that's a crazy thing. So many top performers in recruitment businesses are on their own. They don't sit in a boardroom full of top billers. They're usually on their own, either with the owners or with people that are significantly performing lower than them. It's quite a lonely place. So District 4 is effectively a community where you can start your own mini recruitment business within the community, within the brand, and be surrounded by other people that are all billing 200 grand and plus. You get complete ownership of your destiny. You can do exactly what you want when you want. You can bill what you want. And the back office, everything that you don't want to do, invoicing, contracts, compliance, etc., is taken care of. So you can be an absolute niche expert recruiter. So James and the team are growing rapidly. They are looking for expert independent recruiters to get in touch. If you're billing at least 200,000 in an average year, you're a niche recruiter. We're not looking for generalist recruiters here. If you're a niche recruiter and you're thinking, look, one option is to go back to the office, I'm not excited. The other option is to start my own business in my underpants, not excited. This might be the option for you. So if you're interested, either click the link associated to this episode or go to www.district4.io/Hoxo. That's www.district4.io/Hoxo. On there, you'll see more information about their membership, how to get involved, and register your interest. Within days, James will be on the phone. You'll have a conversation about the opportunity, and you might be one step closer to being in control of your destiny. Don't wait now. Make that contact and change your life post-COVID for the better. So take us to that point then. So you get to 30, and that is the point, as you say, a lot of people struggle with. And up until that point, you probably felt, there's an air of simplicity to the business. It gets to 30 people. What is that major thing that stops people breaking through? Because it's literally, so many don't get through that.
Yeah. So I think if I look at our example, at least when you're 15 people, everyone knows me. Everyone has a lot of contact with me. I can put in enough business for everyone to be really well fed. Everyone buys into the vision because they're spending time with me, and the vision at that point is me. Really easy at that point. Fast forward to 30 odd people, you've got like a few people by that scale who, they know me, but they don't know me that well. Yeah. They don't know me enough to really buy into me. I'm not training them. Someone else is training them. They need to buy into whoever their sort of team leader is. That team leader is probably a really, really inexperienced person themselves. They're probably a manager with no experience, and they might not really know how to do that job and how to build that buy-in and credibility. And then me, myself, because I'm still so inexperienced at this point, I don't really know how to get the managers to do it. I know how I do it, but I just kind of do it because I just do. I can't really break it down. I haven't got I didn't have the wherewithal, the knowledge to really teach managers how to be good managers in themselves and then make sure that it happened. And then so it starts to, when you get to 30, it starts a bit to sort of fray around the edges, and you start to come up against sort of turnover issues when you've never had them before, performance issues when you never had them before. And it's generally because, at least in my experience, because you've got a management team there that they don't have the support, the training, the development, the hand-holding that they need in order to do a good job with the people underneath them. So it all feeds into me. It's all my fault, but to be honest, just didn't know what I didn't know.
How did you solve that? And how do you, and I guess thinking about that from an advice perspective, because literally I can already see that in our business, there's challenges. We had a half-year party on Friday. It was a wicked, but it's the first time I've met in person half the team because of the pandemic. And, some of them I'd not even spoken to one-on-one because my business partner leads a lot of that. So I can empathize hugely. We're at 30 people now as a business. So I can totally, we're in that point, right? It's not recruitment, but it isn't all that different in terms of the way it's run. How did you solve it? And how do people solve that and get beyond?
So I solved it because we had another thing going on in that we had there was a guy that I'd hired in 2009, the first hire that we made post recession, as it were, who was absolute, superstar, this kind of vertiginous career. And he's still with us now. He's our sort of chief commercial officer. I'd earmarked him to go and set up New York, which is a total other story, because that was quite a big call to make at the time. And but I wanted to go out there and I wanted to help him. I didn't want just to send him out and like, right, give me a call every week, let me know how you're getting on. I wanted to be there on the ground with him for a big chunk of those first few years. And the business back in London was nowhere near mature enough for me to just let them get on with it. So I went and hired someone from Hayes, who was basically his specialist thing was building management teams, managing management teams, building in that structure and scalability. That's what he does full time now. He's a management coach to do that. And so I hired him to basically look after UK while I was going away. But more than look after the UK, it was actually, you need to bring in some rigor, structure, process, because I don't know what I'm doing here at this point. I remember having a team. You'd have team meetings on a Monday. You'd set targets for the week. You come back the next Monday, and like clockwork, I'd know that, the guy who was going to go and set up New York, he'd have hit his targets. The other two would have forgotten what their targets were. And again, it's not their fault. In fact, they went on to do really great things in the business. It's just I didn't have the tools to basically put in the structures to make that kind of impossible to happen, let alone give them the training. So we did that. And so, he came, brought a lot of structure, rigor, process with him. I think what it really boils down to is you have to appreciate that managing managers is much harder than managing recruiters, and managing recruiters is hard as it stands. And I think going into that, I was completely naive to that fact, because I thought, right, managing recruiters is really tough. Managing managers should be fairly easy because, we're all managers in it together. And it just doesn't work like that, because people come to the table and they've got so many different strengths, so many different weaknesses. But long story short, we put in place a management training program, which is, now thoroughly enhanced all these years later, but it's still fundamentally there. They get trained as well and as thoroughly as new people when we first join. We have a management framework in place to make sure that people are always doing certain aspects of the job. So these days, for example, how that works is it hypothetically makes it impossible for a trainee to join this business wherever they are in the world and not be managed to a particularly high standard, because we've got the processes in place to make sure that's happening and to track those activities. And I think a big part of it as well is you got to specifically teach people culture, because as the business gets past 30, you can have the best organizational culture in the world. If that individual team culture is either toxic or just neutral, there's nothing there, then that's probably not going to be enough to keep people. Managers need to be working on their own team culture so that they're actually retaining people because they're a great team to be in, not just because, the JCW London office is so much fun. Yeah, exactly. So you have to teach people that they have to pull together a plan as far as how they're doing it. And once you got to grips with those kind of concepts, it started working really well. I think the challenge we had, though, so we kind of fixed that problem before we know it. We then had a good management team, which actually in itself is a struggle. I think if I think about all the conversations I have with like my peers doing similar roles elsewhere in the industry, the thing that they most frequently complain about is their sort of middle management levels. So we did and still do a really good job on that. I think it's really important as a business, but for a number of years, we just lost sight of those sort of key principles I referred to of like building a culture around people, looking after people first and foremost, and then letting them do the rest. We just lost sight of that. And we got to the point where almost for a period of time, it was almost just a bit nasty for a while. There's so many different ways in which people could trip up and get a warning. And we had like a zero policy on lateness, which actually, ended up sacking a few people. And it ended up being like not a great place to be. And staff retention. Now, we did that because I was under the impression that that's what we kind of had to do in order to really scale up. Like we have to bring in these, there have to be rules and rules need to be followed, and these rules make sense. And I'm thinking, well, if I was if I was living under these rules, I'd love it, because, you know, you just follow the rules and just do what you need to do. But the reality is, and I think maybe 10 years prior, it worked really well. But the reality is, at that particular time, you know, graduates, and we were mainly hiring graduates, didn't like that at all. You know, they didn't want that type of environment. They wanted freedom, flexibility. They wanted to be, they never wanted to be shouted at or anything like that. And we were just kind of out of date. And I think the big mistake I made is I stuck my head in the sand on that for too long. And when someone was leaving, I'll be thinking, well, we just need to go out and hire some tougher people. You know, these people just don't like the change. Anyway, eventually I kind of woke up, you know, the scales fell away from my eyes, and we sorted that out. We brought the culture back. You know, we set a clear target to, right, we need to fix this. This isn't working. We need to go back to basics, as in what made the company great initially, and really sort the culture out. I think we set a target of getting onto the Sunday Times 100. Like, we ended up sort of placing 4th place a year later. So that kind of worked really well. And before you know it, we had a culture that was really good again. We then had another issue, which is we just weren't being very productive. So we had like a really good culture, like retention was sky high. We'd gone from having really bad retention to like best in the industry retention, but then we weren't making that much money compared to what we expected to. And I think there was a particular sort of pivotal moment where it was December, just before Christmas, I think either 2017, 2018. And I got a call from sort of the finance department, you know, one of those calls that you never want to get when you're running a business, around like, you know, we're okay now, but if we keep performing at this rate for too many more months longer, we're going to potentially be in a spot of bother.
What was the challenge? What was the problem?
We just weren't making enough money. We weren't making enough money, basically. You know, we were kind of scraping a profit, but we weren't making enough profit to give us a consistently good cash performance month on month.
Were you reinvesting almost too heavily without the team performing higher?
There is an extent, yeah, to an extent, but it was mainly a performance issue. It was mainly performance issue. We had lopsided performance. We didn't have consistent month-on-month performance, and we were netting out to not really making as much money as we needed for a period of time to hold it together. So that ended up being, yeah. I deal pretty well with stress. I think it's probably my only superpower when it comes to leadership. You know, I thrive on stressful situations almost. There's only been 2 times in my career where that's kind of not been the case, and I've thought, actually, this is really bad. And that was one of them. And I ended up spending the whole Christmas buried in spreadsheets. And I was just sitting there thinking, how has this happened? You know, 4 or 5 years ago, we were winning awards like it was going out of fashion, you know, fast growth awards. You had a great culture, massive growth year on year, absolutely crushing it. You know, a clear path to being, you know, 100 odd people. And then sort of 4 years later or so, we're just sort of scraping by. Like, we're still profitable, but not anything towards the level that we should be. We're still growing, but it's pretty anemic. And the trajectory just wasn't anything in line with like all the different goals that I'd set myself and what I'd expected. And it just kind of, it just sort of woke me up a bit. Anyway, I came back in January. I made some changes at sort of senior management level. I'd effectively put myself back into that more hands-on chief exec role, because I'd sort of slightly veered away from that in the previous years. Drastically raised expectations across the business. You know, we did it in London. Back then it was just London and New York. So we did it in London immediately. We did it 3 months later in New York. And then, you know, the way I think about it, at that point, the business was kind of reborn. And we're in a situation where, so it's either 2017 or 2018. I think maybe.
How many people did you have at that point?
So 2018, we were half the size that we are now.
Wow.
Something like that. So I think it was about 50, 60 people. Yeah, something like that. And yeah, since then, It's been great. I think it's kind of best of both worlds.
How do you massively raise expectations in the business? Like, what? That sounds great, but what do you actually mean? What do you do to do something like that?
So for us, it was like, we'd worked so hard to get the culture back on track that the culture ended up getting almost too good, where, well done, you've turned up for work on time, here's a bottle of Cristal to enjoy at lunch. The high standards didn't really feature at all. It was just a great place to be, but you didn't really have to work very hard. You didn't really get any nasty conversations when you didn't get a kick up the backside when you needed it. And that doesn't equate to a high performing organization. It equates to really, really good performance in the Sunday Times Hot 100, but it doesn't equate to good, success and growth. But to a certain extent, the vast majority of the workforce understood that. They were, when I kind of said to them, as in like, guys, a great place to be. We kind of need to make more money than this because that's why we're all here. The response from the entire business was actually sort of very mature. Naturally, there were a couple of people who didn't really appreciate it and left. But for the most people, everyone was fine. And you know what? It's really basic stuff. It's just having higher expectations as far as what people did in their particular day. It's like, people don't like talking about it, but it's good old fashioned activity expectations. Like, what are you going to get done in your day? And because when I spent that Christmas time buried in spreadsheets, what was eye-popping was just how low the activity levels were. In the context of my having been a successful recruiter in the past, you're like, how are we doing so little? And so it was actually fairly straightforward, and it was well received. It was kind of pushing at an open door, and the response was immediate, almost immediate. 3 months later, the deal started kicking in, and since then it's been, we've had 50% some mid 40s sort of compound growth rate globally in terms of revenue, and we've obviously been increasing headcount and profit and all the rest of it. So when we talk about the business, I often kind of think that 2017, 2018 date is actually when we were sort of reborn. I'm really proud of everything we've done before. Learned a hell of a lot of lessons before that, but 2017 onwards is where we've kind of got the best of both worlds. We've got the warmth of culture, the strength of culture that we had during that first sort of startup phase, but we've got the rigor, the professionalization that we got in that second phase where we went through that, that's shown in rocky period.
That's shown in performance, doesn't it, at the end of the day?
Yeah.
It's not, it doesn't lie, right? Your performance doesn't lie. What about the pandemic? So obviously when we connected, where was your business in February, March 2020, and what happened to you personally in that period?
Business was doing well. 2019 was the first year that we did 2 million plus on net profit, which is, that was a big number for me. And I think it's a big number for a lot of people when they're starting up. It represents a degree of scalability that's very difficult to get to. We're making lots of money. We were quite lopsided. I think we were making, New York business was outperforming the other three offices, although two of the other three offices were still sort of very small at that point in time. So it was a bit lopsided, but the other businesses were doing well, especially the sort of quite startup ones, and business generally was growing. It was good. Pandemic, when the pandemic rolled in, I think obviously we didn't see the pandemic coming. What we did see coming was something. People have been talking for years that there's going to be a downturn. It's going to be big because we haven't had one for 10, 12 years, however long it was. I still sort of got very fresh memories of the financial crisis and what that was like to go through. So we'd been progressively building the balance sheet for the previous few years, leaving kind of everything in. I haven't got a lavish lifestyle, so I take out very little, but also we were making sure that we were, investing wisely, growing, but not necessarily overdoing it. And then, so when the crisis actually hit, I spent the first couple of days just locked in Teams calls with the financial director, but I went into that conversation pretty confident. I knew that we were strong financially, that we really profitable up until that point. And yeah, I wasn't disappointed. Once we'd worked out that a couple of our big clients are still gonna pay their bills, the existential crisis kind of ended up passing fairly quickly. But whenever you're in that situation, you could have the best balance sheet in the world. It's amazing how quickly you can burn through that balance sheet, especially once you've got a half decent sized business with lots of very expensive offices and very expensive salaries on it. So yeah. I personally did the line by line cost review, which was a really eye-opening experience, because it makes you realize how much money you're wasting on stuff that you don't
spend
need.
On shit you don't need.
Yeah, exactly. And that's COVID aside. So you think, right, note to self, sort out cost control when we get to the other side of it. Eventually you come to the sort of the line that you don't want to come to, which is wages. And so we did a few things. So I stopped getting paid for something like 9 months or something. The senior leadership and operations team, they took fairly healthy pay cuts, which the business ended up repaying to them all. But they took it like absolute troopers. There was absolutely no problem there. But we did have to make some cuts to the business in terms of headcount. I think some offices, we shrunk more than others. But I think in total net terms, we shrunk by about 15% or something like that. But again, that's on us really, because I just think one of the things that we left too late, we've sorted it now, but we should have sorted it a long time ago, is our performance management. And I think this is a big piece of advice I'd have for anyone who wants to scale up a business. But our performance management framework, how we set targets, how we track performance against those targets, rewarding the overperformance, but also managing the underperformance. It was just way too loose for too long. And we were really good at rewarding overperformance. We've always had a very structured career path. We pay lots of money. We don't have a ceiling, like I've mentioned before. It's fundamentally been part of the business since day one, so that's not a problem. Managing underperformance though is much harder. And managing underperformance in the old days, pre-COVID, was just very loose. If someone had a good attitude, if they were a good egg, then we'd be fine with sort of persistent underperformance. Even if they were ultimately unhappy with that and not particularly sort of content, we just kind of let it drag on. And as a result, going into 2020, we had a bigger team than we should have done, because we had people in the business that just weren't really doing what they need to be, and weren't really content about it. So it was one of those things where it was really difficult decisions to make on headcount, but at the same time not difficult. It's difficult in that these are people who cared about the business, had worked hard, were nice people that I liked personally, and had networks internally. That's made it hard, but it was less hard in that they were all people that would have been happier doing something else. Whether they realized it at the time, you think this isn't working for you, it's not been working for you for a while, you need to go and do something else, either with another company or in a completely different industry. And I could have complete confidence that they would be thanking me for that eventually. And on top of that, we had some trainees that we sort of recently hired that it was untenable for. So we made those adjustments, but fairly quickly then pivoted to. It's difficult talking about COVID, isn't it? Because it's such it's a weird recession in that there's such a human cost to it as well. it's not just a recession where loads of people lose a lot of money. It's one where sort of a lot of lives and families have been broken at the same time. So got to be sensitive to that, but at the same time, it does represent an opportunity from a business perspective. So it's right, how can we capitalize on this opportunity? We know from our experience in the financial crisis that it will be bad. It will probably be bad for longer than we necessarily want it to be. But there will be a rebound, and when the rebound comes, it'll be huge, and we need to make sure that we're in a good position to surf that particular wave. And so we had a focus on productivity last year. So let's make sure the people that we do have are just doing really well. Let's not worry about growth, and let's not even worry about replacement hiring. Let's just get everyone as productive as possible. Hence why we still ended up having a really good year last year. We pivoted our entire London office to do to move away from the UK market and to do the European market. Yeah. We did for various reasons, not just COVID, but that ended up working really well. We got lucky with our sectors, financial services, life sciences, technology, all three sectors done pretty well post-pandemic. Everything was washed out in Q2, but otherwise they kind of rebounded pretty quickly. So that was just lucky. And we put together a plan to say, right, we're just going to focus on productivity in 2020, but we're also going to make sure we're in as good a shape as we can be for 2021 and beyond. We've got a specific vision to take the business to 500 odd people total by 2025. That's going to require a lot of hiring. And really at the point in time that we were when the pandemic kicked off, we wouldn't have been able to hire that number of people and actually have the business continue to be as successful as we were expecting it to be. So last year was spent further professionalizing the business, just making sure that we're building this sort of factory line where you kind of pour entry-level hires into it on the one end, and then this factory line converts those people into highly successful recruiters, highly successful managers, and ultimately highly successful business people. And we've just been focusing on that over the last year or so.
A final interruption to today's episode to introduce Vincere. Vincere is the all-in-one CRM ATS platform built for the recruitment and staffing industry. Now, I first heard about these guys about a year ago. The amount of prospect recruitment agencies and clients I was working with that were telling me they were moving over to Vincere, I had to look into it. And what I found was a business that had a global reach with multiple offices around the world. So they've got this follow the sun methodology, which allows them to support recruitment businesses wherever you are and be in your time zone. But the technology that they've invested in is becoming a disruptor in the space. More and more recruitment businesses are doing this to give their recruiters a competitive advantage. They broke into the G2 Crowd's momentum grid as a market leader based on their reviews from their customers. So the agencies that are using this platform are raving about it. Now, if you're a RAG listener and you're thinking about changing CRM, or you're a new business looking to launch with a new CRM, then I would get in touch with these guys, because if you mention that you're a RAG listener, they're doing an amazing deal. By visiting www.vincere.io/RAG, you can get an exclusive deal which offers 2 months completely free on a 2-year commitment, or 3 months completely free on a 3-year commitment. This applies to all licenses that you've either signed up for now or that you'll add in the duration of the contract. So get on there and have a look. Finally, if you're listening and you're a recruiter and you're thinking, I want to move into a more of a business development role, and I'd like to keep hold of my recruitment knowledge. Well, these guys are recruiting for a BD person, multiple roles in both Sydney and London right now. So if you've got a strong recruitment background, you want to move into BD and you want to work for a fast moving tech business that's helping people like you right now, then get in touch via their website, because they're hiring today. Back to the show. And in terms of the whole working remotely situation, how have you guys come back? I imagine you were all in the office going into COVID. I think you told me you were.
Yeah, we're 100% in office going in. Where we are now is we're hybrid. So most sales teams are working 4 days a week in the office, sometimes 3 days a week in the office, and the ops functions are more remote than that. I don't think we'll ever be. We don't have any intention to be kind of more remote, if that makes sense. I think we'll kind of slowly start moving back to the old ways eventually. Okay. Still hybrid, because that's obviously what people want, and I think it does work. But we won't ever be evolving into a fully remote business or anything like that.
No, I think it's important to have an opinion on it, of how you see it, and then you can build your business around that. It's about, there's loads of, everyone else has got their own take on it. That's cool. But once you listen to all of this, every week I ask that question to people, and, I think the smaller brands and the people that have asked me for advice, they just don't know where they're going with it. They're just constantly testing it. You kind of got to go, well, this is how we're going to do it. We went the other way. We went 100% remote with we have got we work passes where we meet weekly pretty much as teams in different locations, and it works for us. We've got no intention of going back. So we you know, it's complete opposite of you, but that's how we want to do it. And as long as you know what you want, you can build your business around that. You'll be okay, I think.
Exactly.
So, I mean, look, we've already done the hour. I could carry on talking forever. Where did the investor side of your strategy come in? Why didn't you just stick to this? Because it sounds like it's been pretty bloody busy and successful. Why did you start looking at getting even busier?
So we're maybe slightly unusual in that I've got no intention to sort of sell the business, get private equity in, anything like that. Like, I just want to, you know, I thrive on the day-to-day cut and thrust, the challenge, the stress of it. So not interested in kind of getting rid. So I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about a private equity firm being like, oh, why have you done all these side things and not just focused on ABC? But at the same time, want to kind of build something remarkable, scalable, innovative. You know, we're very, very passionate about the sort of quality of service that we provide. Part of that actually has an entrepreneurial element, as in, right, if we see a service line that we can offer that we don't currently offer and can't offer, that is maybe best suited under a brand, then you will now have the attitude of let's go and set it up. And I think if you have these different businesses operating on one umbrella, and these synergy businesses, they work as independent businesses in their own right with their own management teams, but they sit within that wider umbrella. They've got shared support from our sort of excellent operational function, and they've got also synergies from the sales side where they're able to sort of do deals with each other, leverage each other's clients, and you know, arguably grow at a much quicker rate than they would do if they didn't have that kind of support from the rest of the firm. So I think, in all honesty, I believe in diversification. I think, you know, there's lots of businesses out there that have, you know, very big and impressive businesses, like organizations like, you know, Amazon, firms like Allegis, for example, that do numbers of different things within the talent space, and are much stronger for it. But yeah, it's challenging because it's really busy, spread pretty thin, as you can imagine. And, you know, it creates a massive operational and management burden running at these different targets all at the same time. But, you know, for the time being, at least, we're doing a pretty good job of it.
So you literally, you know, you should have, I imagine, you said you don't live a lavish lifestyle. You could probably quit tomorrow and you'd have enough money to live a lifestyle you want for the long term. You're not looking for PE exit sale mode. What is driving you? Like, why are you doing this?
Yeah, I'm not entirely. I've thought about that a few times before. I think so. I love it still. Yeah. Like I, you know, when something comes in and something's gone wrong, I love fixing it. You know, and that just gets more and more complex as the business gets bigger. I know if I sold the business and retired, I'll just be, you know, I'm 38. I'll just be so bored. Like, what am I going to do? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up another recruitment company. And it's like, well, why bother then? But you know, I've always been an aspirational sort of goal-focused person. I've always had a hankering to sort of try and get on the rich list, which is a long way away from me still. Yeah, I've always wanted to be in a situation where I can actually start to shape the world around me through the success I've got, as far as, you know, giving money away and sort of taking care of certain social issues and stuff like that. You know, that definitely drives me more and more as the business gets more successful. But really what it comes down to is I just absolutely love it. You know, I love the challenge of it. I love the ups and downs. You know, we've got a great team. We have a lot of fun along the way. So why change that?
What does an average week look like for you? What different things would you get in 1 week at your role now?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say 80% of my time is still looking after the core recruitment business, which probably right now makes up something like 80% of the revenue as well. So that kind of works. And for the synergy businesses on one side, my role is more as kind of like an advisor / mentor / chairperson. I've got, you know, they're great chief exec who run it. a colleague, who's the chief commercial officer, he pretty much has taken one of them entirely. He kind of basically owns that as his baby, the management consulting firm over in the US. But for those guys, it's more, right, what's the product going to be? What's our vision? What's the governance going to be as far as how we make sure we don't fall over between now and then? It's making sure that they've got their culture battened down as well. Like, a very different culture from JCW. You know, your average management consultant, for example, if you get them hitting the gong every time they write up a bit of business, you know, they're not going to be lasting very long in that business. But they do need to have like a clear, defined culture, so we're not just like every other firm on the street. But yeah, I've got a really good team around me, really capable people. If I got knocked over by a bus tomorrow, the business would keep living and breathing, growing, and I'll come back to a better business. I've got a couple of people in the organization that could do my job, and you know, I'm convinced with time could do it better than me as well. But I mean, a lot of my time at the moment, strategy is a lot of it. It used to be a dirty word for me, but you do have to think about, right, where are we going and why and how are we getting there. Culture, make sure the cultures are strong across the organizations, like I've said. And yeah, fixing problems. As the business gets more complex, the type of problems you get coming your way tend to be something's gone wrong, someone's tried to fix it, they've made it even worse, and then it gets to you. But again, I thrive on that, you know, keeps it interesting.
Wow. So I guess you've kind of answered the vision question, right? Where are you heading? You said you want to be potentially on the rich list. You want to be investing in supporting, you know, actual personal ventures and societal issues, etc. You're 38 years old, right? So you're, you know, incredibly young to be in the position you're in. Is there a vision? Is there a clear vision that you can communicate to us as to what the future looks like, exactly where you'll be, how big it'll be, or whatever? Do you have something that is outwardly communicated?
Yeah. So, you know, we want to be 500 people total by end of 2025. And my hope is that's end up being quite a prudent estimation, and it will overshoot that, but I'll be happy if we do it. We will keep adding more businesses to the sort of venture capital style side of the business, and we got a few ideas on that, but that won't be until the next couple of years. Yeah. And yeah, we've got various financial targets attached to it, but that's all just linking back to that 500 number. So it's just really continue to be more of a diverse organization, continue to grow, be more successful. You know, we've got very clear goals around how good an employer we want to be, how good a service we want to provide, and the extent to which we want to actually give back to our communities as well. You know, very specific goals that we report back to the business every month as far as how we're doing. And I'd like to think we'd have hit all of those by that point. But as things stand, it's just doing more than we're doing, really. You know, if I think about the organizations out there that really inspire me, it's companies like Allegis, you know, which is probably the biggest privately held recruitment company out there. I mean, they're 1,000 years away from us. They're like, I think we need another sort of $14 billion worth of revenue or something before we catch them up. But building something of that scale, taking people along on that journey, you know, making the people around me into highly successful, very wealthy people in their own right, which we're now kind of seeing over the last few years. That's what really gets me excited. So yeah, we've got the specific goals, but you know, I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple of years we sort of pivot in a slightly different direction. And I'm sure there's loads of, we've talked a lot about the mistakes that we've made. I'm sure there's going to be loads more mistakes that we'll make along the way. That'll be a hiccup, but you know, we'll take it as we see it.
Last question, Jamie. 3 pieces of advice you give to a budding entrepreneur in our market, in the recruitment space. 3 clear pieces of advice that they could use in the future.
First of all, make sure you understand the financials. And what I mean by that is, when I went into recruitment, when I went and set up a business, you know, I remember being at Eames, I'm writing up a deal, thinking, well, this is, you know, 20K deal. I'm going to get like 3K of it. Matt's going to get 17K of it. Yeah, maybe a few £100 on the office, but otherwise it's all going to him. You know, completely ridiculous. If I look at my example, I didn't have a better earnings year than my second year at Eames until 5 years after I set up. And it's only relatively recently that I've had access to more money than I would have had if I just stayed as a lifestyle recruiter for the entire period of time. And I think a lot of people don't get that. They pursue a dream, sell loads of money, retire on the beach. But you know, how many people ever get there? So that's one thing, understand that. The second thing is also understand cash, how that works, because, you know, takes a while to get your head around it, but it's a thing that can sort of really bite you in the arse if you don't make it. And culture, got to have a clear culture. Doesn't have to be the same as anyone else's, but I think you need to be clear as in what is accepted in our culture, what's not, why is that going to work, what's our proposition as to how we're going to keep the best people in, which again it's not rocket science, but it's really important, and just try not to lose sight of it. Jamie,
what a pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for giving us some time. You obviously could have been doing a million other things. And everyone who's listened, I'm sure, has took so much value and inspiration from this conversation. And if anyone did want to reach out to you and ask you any questions directly, are you open for them to drop it on?
Drop me a message. Yeah, sounds good.
Wicked. Might take you 15 months to do it, but that's all right, eh? That's what happens to me.
Yeah, I'm actually okay on messages, so
I'm only joking. Look, I definitely want to get you back on in the future. I want to keep an eye on what you're doing and how this, you know, vision comes to reality over the next, you know, I don't know how long the podcast will be. I imagine we'll still be running something of the RAG in 2025. So I want to be there at the end saying, look at that, 500 people, he did it, or 600.
Here's hoping.
That's it. And guys, thank you so much for listening. Thanks so much for giving me your time this season. You know, I have literally, I've produced, I think it's over 120 episodes since the beginning of the pandemic. We've interviewed people far and wide all over the world. And, you know, to see the listenership go up to 22,000 downloads in May. I don't know what the numbers are for June yet. I'm overwhelmed. I mean, I didn't know when I started this, it was just it was based on what I wanted to listen to be honest. I wanted to inspire myself and inspire the person I used to be when I started. So thank you to every one of you for listening. If you do like what you hear, if you've enjoyed Jamie and previous guest story, please share the episodes, put them in group messages, WhatsApps, because, you know, recommendations at an individual level are how you get more listeners on top of what we're doing from a marketing perspective. So I'm going to take a break for the next 4 weeks. There'll be no episodes in July whatsoever. We will be back in August. You can count on that, and we'll be bigger and better and different. We're gonna reshape what we're doing to bring you, you know, season 5 of the RAG. So you please have a wonderful rest of the summer. Until I see you again. Hopefully it's coming home. We're signing off on the morning after, or the day after England beat Germany. So if you're listening after we got knocked out against Ukraine, you can laugh at me, but I'm hoping it's coming home. I'll be back again in August. In the meantime, please stay safe, and I'll see you soon.